might not experience any malaise at any point during their menstrual cycle. Other individuals also, for instance, might not experience any variation in their libido at any point during their menstrual cycle. Again, highly variable, and yet there are some statistically significant trends that have been observed that track to very specific hormonal components within the menstrual cycle. Again, this will all be very contextual. And of course, this can play out in a number of different ways. So for instance, some women experience very heightened levels of sensitivity to caffeine at certain portions of their menstrual cycle. Other women experience more cramping than others, different portions of their menstrual cycle. Tremendous variation from individual to individual. One of the, I view it as an advantage, but one of the things that many females can really do and experience because they have cycles that occur every month that are fairly dramatic in terms of the levels of hormones. So for instance, a more than 1,000-fold increase in progesterone during the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. And I should also mention a 200-fold increase in estrogen during the period just prior to ovulation. That's why they always say estrogen primes progesterone. That's what you learn in kind of basic endocrinology when you're learning the menstrual cycle. Estrogen in the first half of the menstrual cycle primes progesterone in the second half of the ovulatory menstrual cycle. Well, that those estrogen increases just prior to ovulation are in part responsible for the increases in libido, but it's also the presence of increased androgen just prior to ovulation. So there's a lot of complex interplay. I think what we will do is we will reserve the discussion about libido per se and some of the other aspects related to sexual differentiation that we were talking about earlier for a future episode. But hopefully now you have in mind what the ovulatory menstrual cycle is. It is a signal from the brain, from the hypothalamus, which then triggers a signal from the pituitary, an endocrine gland, which then signals the release of hormones that travel to the ovary and that control two things: maturation of eggs and the identification of one egg in particular, and then preparation of the milieu, the environment in which that fertilized egg could potentially land and mature into a healthy embryo and child. So if you have that framed up in your mind, and even if you just extracted maybe 10 to 15% of the hormones and different aspects that I described up until now, I would consider you far more knowledgeable about this entire process than 99% of people out there. Certainly not the OBGYNs and urologists, but the 99% of individuals out there. It also frames up for us the second half of this whole story about fertility and fertilization, which is the generation of sperm and how the sperm eventually arrive at the egg and how certain sperm are selected to potentially fertilize that egg, whereas others never really stand a chance. So next we're going to talk about sperm. We're going to talk about what sperm are, where they are generated and how they are generated, and how they need to travel both within the male and within the female in order to allow fertilization to potentially occur. I'd like to take a brief break and thank our sponsor, Inside Tracker. Inside Tracker is a personalized nutrition platform that analyzes data from your blood and DNA to help you better understand your body and help you reach your health goals. I've long been a believer in getting regular blood work done for the simple reason that many of the factors that impact your immediate and long-term health can only be analyzed from a quality blood test. The problem with a lot of blood and DNA tests out there, however, is that you get data back about metabolic factors, lipids, and hormones and so forth, but you don't know what to do with those data. Inside Tracker solves that problem and makes it very easy for you to understand what sorts of nutritional, behavioral, maybe even supplementation-based interventions you might want to take on in order to adjust the numbers of those metabolic factors, hormones, lipids, and other things that impact your immediate and long-term health to bring those numbers into the ranges that are appropriate and indeed optimal for you. If you'd like to try Inside Tracker, you can visit insidetracker.com/Huberman and get 20% off any of Inside Tracker's plans. That's insidetracker.com/Huberman to get 20% off. So we've covered the ovulatory cycle in females. And I confess, it was a lot of information with a lot of biological nomenclature. But I promise you that many of those same themes and indeed the same names and nomenclature will show up in the discussion that we're going to have now, which is about the generation of sperm. Now, sperm are similar to eggs in the sense that they are part of the germline. They are these protected cells, protected in the sense that the activities of an individual are not going to change the genetic makeup of those cells. Now, again, there are instances in which mutagens, such as chemicals, could disrupt the genomes of the germ cells in males, just as it could in females. But in general, the activities, the things that we do, the experiences we have, doesn't tend to change the genome of those cells. However, there are a lot of lifestyle factors, do's and don'ts, nutrition and supplements and prescription drugs, et cetera, that can indeed modify the quality of the sperm. And we'll talk about what sperm quality means. But the point is that the sperm cell, much like the egg cell, are both germline cells. They are not like somatic cells. They are unique populations. And let's just remember what the job of the sperm cell is. The job of the sperm cell is to deliver the genetic material from the father, and to do that in the form of a haploid cell. So that means 23 chromosomes, 22 autosomes, one so-called sex chromosome. Again, not sex the verb, at least not in this case. Sex the verb is a discussion we're going to have in a few minutes. But sex the noun, the sex chromosome can either be an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. Okay, so 22 autosomes and then one sex chromosome is going to be contained within the sperm, because it's a haploid cell, not a diploid cell. Remember, the egg was diploid, then it became haploid. The sperm cells are cells that are created through the division of other cells, but after that division occurs through a process called meiosis, the sperm cell is going to contain 23 chromosomes consisting of 22 autosomes and one sex chromosome. And the sperm that manages to deposit its DNA contents into the egg to fertilize the egg will either have an X sex chromosome or a Y sex chromosome. And the Y sex chromosome has a number of different genes on that chromosome that will suppress, for instance, the development of the female reproductive axis. One good example would be the Mullerian inhibiting hormone, or MIH. The gene for Mullerian inhibiting hormone, which is a hormone that prevents the formation of the Mullerian ducts, which is part of the female reproductive structure. Well, that gene controls the prevention of the development of the female genitalia, and in doing so promotes the development of the male genitalia. And there are other examples of genes that are on the Y chromosome that give you a what we call male phenotype, right? You have genotype and phenotype. By the way, in case you haven't heard this in a while from your high school biology, or if you never heard it, no big deal. Karyotype is the complement of chromosome, XX or XY. And there are individuals out there that are XXY or XYY, a discussion for our episode on sex differentiation. That's karyotype with a K. Then there's genotype, which are the genes that you have. And then there's phenotype, spelled PH, P-H-E-N-O-T-Y-P-E, phenotype. And the phenotype is how the genes, which then code for RNA, which code for protein, how those are expressed in terms of things like eye color. So eye color is a phenotype, height is a phenotype, hair color is a phenotype. Okay, so you have karyotype, genotype, and phenotype. Well, what we need to do is we need to bring together that sperm, which is haploid, it contains those 23 chromosomal strands, with either an X or a Y sex chromosome as the 23rd chromosome. We need to get that cell to the egg. And so when we talk about spermatogenesis, of course, we're talking about the generation of sperm cells. But what we're really talking about is the generation of cells whose job is to deliver the genetic material from dad to the egg within the female in a way that increases the probability that not only will that egg be fertilized, but that it will progress in a healthy way with each set of chromosomes from mom and from dad, each set of 23 chromosomes, that is, will progress in a healthy way, will implant in a healthy way, and will maintain and grow in a healthy way to a healthy embryo and child and eventually adult. That's the job of the sperm, okay? So as we talk about spermatogenesis, let's just remember that and why they're there in the first place. Now, a few things about sperm that are interesting, besides the fact that they're haploid, and besides the fact that, as you all know, they swim, they have a head and a tail. They actually have a head, a mid-region, and a tail, and that mid-region turns out to be very important. It's something we'll come back to again and again. That mid-region is really key for the ability for sperm to engage in forward progression, to swim forward. It involves the activity of mitochondria, which are involved in generation of ATP, which is involved in all aspects of energy in all cells. But let's just remember that the sperm are swimming cells, and in order to create a really good swimmer or set of swimmers, you need a couple of things. First of all, within the testes is where the sperm develop. And unlike in females, and unlike in the ovary, there's no vault of sperm. The sperm are continually being generated. It takes about 60 days for sperm to be born from their parent cells, because cells actually give rise to other cells. That's the way it works. To be born from their parent cells and then mature to the point where they